Okay, in this lesson, I want to cover the concluding section of the Odyssey, as well as the opening portion of the Persian War, which is really the first event in Greek history that I spent time focusing on with the students. I talked about in the last lesson how I kind of open up the classical era of Greek history with a close study of the cities of Sparta and Athens and the distinctive characteristics of each of those respective cities. It's the Persian War, which really is the first large scale event that warrants attention when you're studying the Greeks. It unfolds at the very beginning of the 5th century BC, which is, as I've said a couple times, is kind of the main focus here for a study of the Greeks. So it's really the first large scale event that we study. So before getting into the specifics, I want to just say a word about teaching history in a kind of classical setting, in a classical humanities, integrated humanities setting, because again, my goal here is not just to provide you with the content, but some insight into the way to implement this content in class, to present the content in a way to the students that will be most efficacious for their learning. So the teaching of history is a little bit of a fraught exercise in classical circles, in the classical world. In my experience, there's a sense among classical history teachers that we're still not sure how to do this task or how to carry out this task in a way that's specifically classical or that reflects our specifically classical commitments. All right. There is a sense among a lot of classical teachers that lecture is a kind of modality of teaching that is really more or less frowned upon, if not outright prohibited, in a classical setting. But on the other hand, there's a sense, again, among many classical educators, that textbooks are not the sorts of things that classical teachers should be using, right? That we should be relying solely upon primary sources in our instruction. Well, if you think about it, if you take out lecturing, you take out textbooks, it becomes rather hard to figure out how you're going to present historical chronology to students in a way that will be coherent and clear for them. All right. So I want to just talk about the way I approach this task and the way I have in the classroom taught history in a way that I do think reflects a kind of commitment to classical principles, but also does recognize the realities of instruction in this particular material. Right. So when we're talking about the literature, you can do primarily Socratic based instruction, right? You can sit around with your students reading and discussing the literature and avoiding lecture, right? Depending on the group of students that you're working with and what stage of their instruction they're at, you can have that instruction take a primarily conversational based modality. But when it comes to history, when there's certain just facts and chronology that need to be conveyed to students, that kind of approach is not going to work exclusively, right? Not supplemented with other modalities. So the way I think history is taught well in a classical setting is a kind of through a combination of modalities. All right. So the spine of the chronology, right? The overarching story, right, of history, I present through lecture. Right, and I tell the students the larger story of the events that we are studying. Right, I provide them the kind of outline of the chronology that we are examining, and then I use the sources to go deeper into any number of episodes within that chronology. Right, so when it comes to the Persian War, for instance, right, it's Herodotus is the primary source here, right, that we're going to resort to, and I'll be talking about him in a moment. But I will kind of tell the students, I will provide to the students a kind of outline of some of the events that lead up to the Persian War and that caused the outbreak of the Persian War, and then once the war breaks out, we'll turn to Herodotus and read his account of the Battle of Marathon, right, and kind of dive into that specific event, that specific episode in the conflict through his eyes, right? And the way I kind of think about this is, as a teacher of history, you're a storyteller, right? You're up there telling the story for students, but you're sharing the storytelling task with whatever source you're using at the time. So again, for the Persian War, it's Herodotus, who then takes his turn as storyteller, telling the story of the Battle of Marathon. And we'll kind of go back and forth with that, with the sources in that way, right? So that I'm kind of providing the big picture to students, and then using the sources to kind of fill out the details and the drama and the kind of granular level material that will allow specific episodes and specific personages to come alive for the students, right? And it's the same when we get to the Peloponnesian War, right? I'm switching on and off with Thucydides as far as storytelling duties, and I think that's a good way for students to be able to kind of keep track of the larger story, like what's going on in the big picture, which is oftentimes hard to glean from a writer like Herodotus. Right, you by summarizing and distilling the number of passages in his work, you can convey to students a much better idea of what's going on chronologically. But then when you want to provide students with some of the drama and the meaning of these events and what makes them memorable, that's the time, I think, to allow these great writers to work their magic on the students. So it's kind of a regular kind of going back and forth between myself lecturing the students on the larger big picture of what's going on, and then turning those storytelling duties over to our primary sources at eventful moments. Right. I will also mix in a variety of visuals. Right. So artwork of different sorts will play a role. Different depictions of battlefields and battlefield tactics, right, as displayed on maps and so on. Those will be worked in as well as short videos, right? And I'll talk about these, but there are videos you can find online that will kind of illustrate for students troop movements and battles, the way certain battles unfolded, and they often those videos often only last about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you can show them to students to give them a sense of what's going on the battlefield in a way that I think surpasses the ability to describe that to them, just with words. So again, I'll mix that into the instruction for students. All right, so that's just a general sense of what kind of day-to-day instruction in history looks like, how I present the material on a day-to-day basis. And of course, along the way, we do a variety of writing and assignments and assessments that allow the students to engage in other ways. And I'll talk more about those as we go through some of the specifics. But as far as like the daily presentation of history, that's the way I approach that. Persian War, that's going to be the first large-scale event that we're going to focus on. And it's going to be the historian Herodotus who's going to provide us our primary source for the events of the Persian War. Now, you can start off your instruction in the Persian War by giving students a little bit of background on the Persian Empire, its rise under Cyrus the Great, its conquest of Babylonia and some of the surrounding areas, and that's that's all depending on how much time you have. But you want to just make the students aware of the extent of the Persian Empire and the fact that this is the dominant political entity at the time that we are dealing with at the opening of the 5th century BC. The relevant map to show students would be something like this, a map like this, which shows the Persian Empire in orange and the Greek world in green. And even that's a little bit deceiving because the green suggests a single political entity, a unified political entity, and as I've already discussed, the Hellenic world is really a collection of politically independent poli, city-states, right, who share a kind of shared heritage and culture, but no common governing structure, right? Whereas everything in orange is kind of unified into the governing structure of the Persian Empire. So the point to make here, right, is that the Persian War, in pitting The green spot on the map against the orange spot on the map is one of the all-time underdog stories in history. Right? The Greeks have no business winning this conflict, and in fact, when the conflict breaks out, there's numerous Greek city-states that side with the Persians on the clear expectation that there's no way that the Greeks could fend off an empire of such size and resources, right? But the Greeks do prevail in the conflict, and much of the heroic cast of mind that informs Greek culture for the next 100 years, particularly in Athens, right? Much of that bravado and daring and thumos, as it were, that seems to permeate through the entirety of Greek culture. This the kind of confidence or brazenness, even that permeates Greek and particularly Athenian culture, is a result of the experience of the Greeks conquering this seemingly invincible enemy in the course of the Persian War. Right? There is a sense that runs through Greek culture for the next century, right? That if we as a people can defeat the Persians, there's nothing we can't do, and there must be something uniquely excellent about us, right? If you can take a look at Aeschylus's play The Persians, where this sentiment gets artistic expression, but in some way or another, that idea, I think, is that confidence is there behind all of Greek culture. Okay, so the events that lead up to the conflict with the Persians are a little bit complicated, and as told by Herodotus, can be a little bit hard to follow. So this is a part of the history that I will lead students through and try to summarize for them as best as I can. So I've already spoken with the students about Athens and its relationship to the region of Ionia, which is what is the extreme west coast of present-day Turkey, along with the outlying islands, which during this time was part of the Greek-speaking world. It had actually been colonized by people from Athens and the surrounding environment. So there was a kind of shared culture, shared heritage between Athens and Ionia. And many of a number of the cities of Ionia become important and influential trading centers during this period, right? So a figure named Aristagoras, who hails from one of these Ionian cities called Miletus, gets up a rebellion against the Persian Empire, and there's actually a story an additional story behind that. Again, you have to limit the detail you go into with the students, but Aristagoras kind of found himself on the outs with the Persian Empire, and to kind of save his own skin, he gets up a rebellion. He convinces the Miletians to join in, and a number of the other cities in Ionia. They reach out to Aristagoras reaches out to the Athenians to ask them for help, and again, the Athenians, having a kind of affinity or brotherhood for the Ionians, send a kind of I want to say kind of small scale expedition to help out in the revolt, right? 20 ships, right, that they send to aid Aristagoras and the other Ionians in the revolt against the Persians. And as Herodotus says, these ships were the beginning of the woes for the Greeks and the barbarians, right? In other words, this was the start of the conflict. Well, the Athenians, alongside their allies in Ionia, burned down the city of Sardis, which is a city that's under the control of the Persians at that time. And news gets back to Darius, who is the emperor at that time, the Persian emperor at this point, and he quickly sends military forces to exact revenge, to retake the territory, and to put down this rebellion. He meets those forces meet with the Greeks, Ionians, and Athenians at the Battle of Ephesus, where the Persians prevail in a decisive victory, and where the Athenians are sort of convinced that this little foray of theirs into the matters of Ionia was probably a bad idea, and the survivors head back home. At which point the Persians proceed to to inflict a revenge on the Ionian city-states that partook in this rebellion, including Miletus, which they leveled to the ground. But Darius has not forgotten about the participation of the Athenians in this revolt. He swears revenge upon them, and he is said to have a servant who sits with him at dinner or approaches him at dinner and repeats to him 3 times on a nightly basis, "Remember the Athenians." Right? "Sire, remember the Athenians." Right? "Remember to take your revenge for what they did." And so these are the events leading up to the start of the Persian War. So Darius sends a fleet in the year 490 to invade Greece and to take revenge upon the Greeks for their participation in the revolt in Ionia. They head first to the much smaller city-state of Eretria and sack that city because they had lent aid to the Ionian revolt. But the clear target, the primary target for this expedition is clearly Athens. So the Athenians reach out to a number of the other city-states in the area for help. The Plataeans, the city of Plataea, provides some assistance, probably the most notable assistance, and the Athenians reach out to the Spartans, with whom they were on somewhat uneasy but passable terms at this point. And the Spartans respond that they are in the midst of a religious festival and that they cannot, during the performance of the rituals involved in that festival, send soldiers abroad. Right, there's a kind of religious prohibition upon them from doing so, and that's there's always been a great debate over whether this was just an excuse that the Spartans were given, or whether this was a genuine excuse, that a genuine reason for not sending aid to the Athenians. They do actually, when that festival is over, the Spartans do send a contingent, though they show up after the battle unfolds. So that's a matter of some debate, and you can point that out to the students. The forces of the Persians are aided by a figure named Hippias, he's actually the son of Pisistratus. He had been the ruler, the tyrant actually of Athens for a period, and then was expelled from the city upon Cleanthes' rise and fled to Cleisthenes' rise and fled to Persia in refuge. He accompanies this expedition and provides kind of guidance to the Persian generals on the best way to attack Athens. So it's Hippias who points out to the Persians that they can make their landing by marathon, and it would just be a short march from there down to Athens. So the Athenians, with their allies, chiefly the Plataeans, march northward under the general Miltiades to face the assembled army of the Persians at Marathon. Now, this is the place where I will talk a little bit about the military tactics of the Greeks, and you can address this earlier. You can go into this earlier when you're talking about the Spartans and the Athenians and their history and their culture. Certainly, that's one place where you can work this material in. I like to do it on the eve of the Battle Marathon, in part to help explain to the students, to help them to understand how it was that the Greeks were able to prevail against this much more powerful enemy. The way the Greeks fought was unique and was uniquely advantageous to them when they took on foreign enemies. They fought in these formations where each soldier carried a shield that protected not himself, but the soldier to the left of him. right? And it was a shield. The shield was known as the Hoplon shield. And what made it particularly unique and particularly useful or maneuverable in battle was the way it was held. And you can see in that picture there, right? Other shields that were used at the time had the handle in the middle, and so the soldier would hold the shield in the middle and would have less kind of balance and maneuverability with the shield. But the Hoplon shield was designed in such a way that the handle was to the right of the shield, and there was an arm strap that then went around the middle of the shield. So this made the shield much more maneuverable. And the soldiers then could fight in formation where they would use their left hand to ward off blows directed to the soldier next to them, while using their right hand to thrust with a spear or a sword, right? While the soldier to the right of them was warding off any blows directed at themselves, right? So this gave rise to the hoplite soldier, right? And you can find different depictions of what they looked like, right? But the hoplite was typically armored, right? Compared to the typical Persian warrior who wore like a almost kind of like a fabric armor, right? The Greeks, the Greek hoplite was armored generally in bronze armor. The hoplite fought in a formation that came to be known as the phalanx, and you see what that looks like here, right? And again, you can see how the shield carried on the left arm of each hoplite was used to guard the man next to each individual soldier, while he would thrust again with his right hand using a spear or a sword, trusting the soldier to his right to protect him. So obviously there are a couple things needed here, right? There the necessary equipment, obviously, but the ability to manufacture that necessary equipment at scale. But more than that, the discipline and the ethos required of the men to work together in this kind of organized fashion and to trust their safety in the front line of battle to other citizens, to their fellow citizens, right? So it's often speculated that the unique bonds of the polis, right, the unique bonds that Greeks felt for their countrymen, resulted from the way that they fought, right? Resulted from the fact that they were required to depend upon and to rely upon their fellow citizens in the very heat of battle. And that trust then permeated through all their other relationships and through all their kind of political interactions, right? There was a kind of requirement for all Greek members of the polis, all Greek citizens, that they be willing to entrust their lives to their fellow citizens, right? So that's something that's often speculated about. You know, one of the kind of underlying forces of Greek history and Greek culture. The relevant point here at this, you know, if you present this material at this stage of the history, this is also an immensely effective tactic, right? This is an immensely effective way to fight. Right? You can look at the depiction here, and again you can find other depictions. You can see how hard it would be to permeate through a wall of men who are coming at you in this way. All right, how hard it would be to find a way through an army that's presenting itself in this way to you, right? So, you know, the Greeks are able to prevail over much larger forces throughout the Persian War, and a lot of that has to do with their military tactics. In part, the tactics they employ on land, in the use of the phalanx, and then the tactics they employ at sea, and we'll talk about those a little later on. So again, you can find kind of illustrations or animations of the battle and how it unfolds online to give the students a kind of visual of what's happening on the battlefield. The basic the significant thing that happens here, right, is Miltiades makes a kind of crucial choice at the opening of the battle. Right, the Persians are camped, as you see, on the edge of a swamp, and they are prepared to march southward towards Athens. And Miltiades' job is to get himself in between the Persian march and the city of Athens. But he has so few soldiers at his command that his overriding anxieties that the Persians are simply going to, by sheer numbers, turn his flank, right, get around his flank, and be able to kind of roll up the entire army by outflanking them in that way. So he makes the decision to spread out his line of battle and to decrease the ranks by which the phalanx presents itself. I think that the typical number of ranks was 8. I could be wrong about that number, but I think it's something like 8. And Miltiades decides to stretch that out so that each part of the line is not meeting the Persians with the same amount of force as would usually be employed, but so that the line could be spread out in such a way that the Persians would not be able to go around his flanks, would not be able to just kind of bypass a part of the army and then kind of roll up the rest. All right, and the significance of that decision is that it took some confidence on Miltiades' part in the tactics and equipment and morale of the Greeks to make that decision, right? To believe that a smaller number of ranks could still meet and prevail over the Persian forces, right? Because of their training and because of their commitment to the cause, right? And because of their equipment and so on, right? So he makes that decision to thin out his line, and it proves to be effective. The Greeks are able to prevail over the Persians after the Persians make a press upon the center line, and then ultimately it's actually the Greeks are actually able to kind of wrap around both sides of the Persians and begin to outflank them on both sides and drive the Persians back to their ship, the survivors back to the ships that are waiting in Marathon Bay. Now, the Persians are not done at this point. They do re-embark on their ships, and they sail southward around the Attic Peninsula in order to simply bypass the army of Miltiades and attack Athens from the sea. So the army, the Greek army, then is required to turn around and march back to Athens and actually to the coastline near Athens to meet this force. And when the Persians come around the peninsula, when they are prepared to make their sea landing, they find Miltiades' army there drawn up on the coast, prepared to meet them, and they realize that the Persians realize that they're not prepared to make the assault on the entrenched position of the Athenians at this point, and they simply go home at that point. All right. So now this is perhaps the start of the legend of Marathon. If the students will know anything about Marathon, of course they'll know the marathon race and have maybe some vague idea of how it's based on the events surrounding this battle. So it's a point of interest for the students, and it's a good way to draw them in. So there's at least 3 possible sources for that legend. One of which is this march of the Athenians from the scene of the battle, this night march that they take from the scene of the battle to the coast, which would have been roughly 26 miles. Another source of the legend of this one is it only makes its first appearance several centuries later. It's in the writing of Plutarch, where this version of the legend first appears, that after the battle, one of the soldiers runs back to the Athenians to declare the victory, right? He arrives in Athens shouting Nike, right? Victory, and then falls down dead because he's exhausted, right? And again, it would be, approximately 26.2 miles that he would have run. I think that's the most commonly known version of the legend, but it's probably the most improbable, right? Because as I said, it doesn't appear until much later. The most likely source of the legend is actually it's in Herodotus. He tells us that on the eve of the battle, the Athenians send for help to Sparta, as I mentioned. They send a figure named Phidippides or Philippides to run. He was a famous runner, and he runs all the way to Sparta to ask for that help. And as I said, the Spartans turn it down momentarily. They do. The Spartans will arrive at the field of Marathon after the battle is over and look around and kind of go, "Hey, good job, Athenians." But at that point, their presence there is superfluous. So it's really the Athenians who are the victors at Marathon. They're the city-state that prevails against the Persians. And of course, this filled them with tremendous pride, right? That they took on this vast empire, the forces of this vast empire, and prevailed. So they themselves had a sense right from the beginning that this was a tremendous accomplishment. And one sign of this is that they buried their dead soldiers on the field of Marathon rather than bringing their remains back to Athens, as would have conventionally been the case. They bury them right there in a great mound, which can still be seen there to this day. And that's you're looking at that there. And this was a special honor that was given to the soldiers and allowing them to lie where they had fallen. So right from the beginning, then the Athenians felt a tremendous pride in the accomplishment of defeating the Persians at Marathon. They knew, nonetheless, that this conflict was likely not over, and they had a strong sense, as did the other Greeks, that the Persians would be back, and that is in fact what will happen 10 years later under a new Persian emperor named Xerxes. The Persians will reinvade Greece one more time. So I'll talk about that part of the Persian War in our next lesson. Okay, it's around this time then that I am working towards the conclusion, the concluding sections of the Odyssey. Right, working through the concluding chapters. So, when you're going through the middle section, as I discussed in the last lesson, right, you're going through all the adventures of Odysseus, all the trials that he goes through in his attempt to make it back to Ithaca, and as I said, you're really kind of focusing on and emphasizing the various virtues that he displays in the course of confronting one obstacle after another, right, emerging as this man of complete virtue, right. He finally does make it back home with the aid of the Phaeacians, and in chapter 16 reveals his identity to Telemachus, who now works alongside his father to plot the downfall of the suitors. And so, as I said early in the story, really it's Telemachus who in some ways is kind of the main character for our students, right? Whether he's the main character of the epic or not, I think for our students, he's kind of the figure for them to latch on to, right? Because he's the figure whose story is most relevant to them. Is the story of this young man who grows into the virtue required of him. And it's now with his father there demonstrating for him all the cunning, all the patience, all the self-control, all the courage that's required for them to retake the kingdom, that he begins to emulate all those traits and slowly begins to show himself his father's son, a man worthy of the standard that his father sets. And so as you go through these sections, as you go through these chapters, I think this is the point to emphasize now, right? Telemachus had heard about his father, had heard about the standard of conduct that he exemplified earlier on in the story when he went on his travels. Now he's seeing it firsthand. So now at this stage, he's actually practicing those virtues, right, and carrying them out as he works alongside his father, right? So that's kind of the sort of the theme I usually stress as we go through these sections. I will say, after he reveals himself to his son in book 16, there's a couple books there where Odysseus makes his way. Eventually, he's led back to the palace in disguise, and he begins plotting slowly. He begins kind of gathering allies. He has a couple conversations with Penelope, who he's still wary of and doesn't reveal himself to just yet. And then there's a number of like portents or signs of the impending doom of the suitors that emerge during this time. The suitors mistreat Odysseus, who they still don't recognize when he gets back to the palace, and this is in part, some indication of the rottenness of character that they display, which warrants the revenge that they're going to suffer, right? But I will say, in these chapters, there's Homer's clearly building up the suspense to the moment of revenge. And if there's any part in the book that if you need to skip through for purposes of time, these would be the chapters that I would skip around a bit. All right. I think you can, roughly, chapters 17, 18, 19, you can take a look at some excerpts from these chapters. You can even read a little bit with this, an excerpt or two with the students in class, or and then summarize the rest. And I think they would be fine. Right. Again, that's not to say that you should do that, but if for purposes of time you need to cut anything from the text, this would be where I would cut. And then of course, Odysseus does finally reveal himself in the great test, right? The shooting of the stringing of the bow, and then the shooting of the arrow through the 10 axe handles, which reveals his identity to the suitors, and then the revenge commences. And this is a great action-packed part of the story. I always read this aloud, this whole section with the students, and try to give it all of its dramatic flair, right, to really do it justice, because I think it's one of the places in the story where, again, I think they can really be drawn in. But the thing to emphasize there is that, as Odysseus is fighting the suitors against, unimaginable odds, and prevailing, right, in demonstration of his prowess as a warrior, his son Telemachus is there fighting right next to him, showing the same courage, showing the same prowess, showing himself a worthy son to his father, showing that his moral development is complete, right? So this is the same man who first appeared to us, the same young man who first appeared to us in the story, crying and weeping because the suitors were besetting his kingdom. Now he's there slaying those suitors, exerting himself against them with the same competence as his father. His moral development is complete. And it's a moral development that has taken the shape it has because he has had the proper role model to follow. So again, it's a great and exciting and engaging passage to read with the students, but it does kind of also serve as the culmination to this theme that we've been tracing through the beginning of the work. A couple passages I'd like to focus on in the concluding stage of the work, after the battle scene. So at this stage, Odysseus does reveal his identity to Penelope. Right? He does say, I am Odysseus. Right? He removes the disguise. Athena helps remove the disguise from him, and he reveals himself to his wife. And her response is kind of unexpected to him. Right? Rather than rushing to him and embracing him, she's like, "How do I know you're Odysseus? Right? Like, how do I know you're not just some other guy here to try to cheat me and my family out of the kingdom?" And it's a interesting response. It's one that shows that Penelope is an apt match for her husband, right? As Odysseus is cunning and wary and self-composed, so too is Penelope, right? She doesn't have the kind of ordinary emotionally effusive reaction you might expect, but she kind of, as a matter of self-control or composure, kind of wants to make sure that this is her husband return. So she puts him to a test, and she tells her maid to move the bed out into the hallway so the stranger can sleep there. And Odysseus responds and says, "Well, who cut down the bed? Right? You can't move the bed out of the chamber, right, or bed chamber, because it's embedded in or built out of a rooted olive tree." Right? He had designed this bed, he had constructed this bed out of a rooted olive tree. And when he shows his knowledge of the construction of the bed, that's when Penelope realizes that that's got to be Odysseus, because nobody else knew about that. Right? No stranger would know about that. So at this point, then they reunite. The significance of that scene, though, is in the symbolism of the bed, rooted in the fruiting olive tree, right? So marriage as the source of childbearing, right, as the institution upon which the production of the next generation relies, is represented in the flowering and fruiting of the olive tree, right, through the joining of husband and wife. But the fact that this tree is rooted at the center of the palace, at the center of the king's bedchamber, suggests that the family itself, the institution of the family, is embedded in and is the root out of which the political grows and flourishes, right? In other words, there's a way in which the symbol kind of conveys an idea of a deep interrelatedness between family and political structure and polis, right? Between family and city. This sense of the family as kind of the foundation or root, as it were, of the political structure is one that runs through much of Greek culture and much of Greek thought. And it's one way of helping us to understand the political world of the Greeks. It's a world that's permeated with familial relations, and the attempt to kind of organize and mitigate those relations, and in some way subordinate them to the larger political relations obtaining between families. You'll see later thinkers like Plato and Aristotle will give a lot of thought to the relationship between family and political structure, right? Because it is such a ingrained way of thinking about politics. Plato, for instance, in the Republic, will try very hard to kind of break this relationship, this very intimate relationship between family and political structure, because he thinks that the political structure has larger, more kind of superintending needs and duties that it places upon men, right? But in different ways, they're kind of responding to this widespread conviction among the Greeks that the family is kind of the preliminary and basic unit of the political structure. And I think the relevant point to make to students here is the reason for that is because the family, as displayed in the course of the Odyssey, is not just a kind of biological unit, right? Fathers are not related to their son merely by fact of reproduction or procreation. There's a moral relationship that obtains between father and son, and between mother and son, and between husband and wife, right? There's duties incumbent upon each station. And the proper relationship of a child to their parent, particularly of a son to his father, is a morally inflected relationship, right? The son looks up to his father to exemplify the virtues that are going to be expected of him in adulthood, right? So the father doesn't just usher the child into the world biologically, but guides his upbringing and his moral and spiritual development by providing the standard of conduct by which he himself must be formed and will be judged. And so this is captured very well at the conclusion of the story, in the concluding scene, where Odysseus and Telemachus are prepared to fight against the relatives of the suitors, who kind of get up a small army and kind of go seeking revenge upon Odysseus. And so Odysseus and Telemachus are forced to fight to meet these relatives of the suitors. The battle actually never comes off. Athena intervenes at the end and calls it off. As they're waiting and expecting this battle, Odysseus kind of taunts his son, kind of playfully, right, or kind of encouragingly. He says to him, Telemachus, now you're about to fight in an engagement which will show every man's mettle. Be sure not to disgrace your ancestors who were eminent for their strength and courage all the world over, right? So it's a very kind of succinct expression of what has been expressed throughout the whole work, which has been captured throughout the whole work, which is this idea that sons are expected to live up to the standards set by their fathers and their grandfathers and their ancestors, right? That as a young man, the most basic moral influence upon you is going to be the standards set by your family, which you are expected to live up to. And Telemachus, when he responds, he says, you say, truly, my dear father, and you shall see, if you will, that I am in no mind to disgrace your family. What he's saying there is, I have met that standard, and I will meet it again. I have achieved the requisite moral development. And you'll see that. You'll see me prove that. You've seen me prove it, right, in the battle against the suitors, and you'll see me prove it again. So again, this is what's captured there is the idea that Telemachus' moral development is complete. He has met that standard. And Laertes, who is father to Odysseus and grandfather to Telemachus, who was watching this exchange, says proudly, what a day I am enjoying. I indeed rejoice at it. My son and grandson are vying with one another in the matter of valor. Right? So the kind of patriarch of the family, the oldest living ancestor at the time, and who the representative of the heroic standard of the family in the story at this point, looks upon his son, looks upon his grandson, and says, all is well. All is fitting. You have met the standard of courage. You've both met the standard of courage that I passed down to you, and that you are now passing down to subsequent generations. This is everything a Greek man could want, right? That his son and his grandson live up to the standard of courage that he himself sets. So the point there then is that these familial relationships are not just biological relations. They're moral relations. Father stands to his son not just as procreator, but as moral exemplar. He sires not just his son's physical existence, but his spiritual and moral existence as well. He gives to his son the very form of life, the very form of mind and character and soul that will shape and determine the life of his son. And it's precisely because the family has this moral tenor to it that it can serve as the proper and adequate unit for political life. Because the polis too is going to rely on the courage and commitment and loyalty and virtue of its members. The polis too has a standard of virtue that it exemplifies and which it passes on from generation to generation. And the polis too flourishes and is at peace when each succeeding generation lives up to that standard adequately. And so as the Greek child is raised in a family and imbibes the moral standards exemplified by his father and his father before him through that familial structure, in the way the standard by which he will be held and judged is passed on to him through his family, the polis too will provide the standard of conduct, the model, and the great cause for which he will be willing to give his life, because it's the entity that gives his life meaning. And so we can see here the beginnings of the uniquely Greek conception of the relationship between the citizen and the political structure that calls for his loyalty, between the citizen and the polis and the city. Right? And it's a moral relationship through and through.